The Newsday continues here on One News Now Business. I'm Diego Castro. Here are the biggest stories on the economic and corporate fronts. The Bangko Sentral may extend its policy rate pause at the Monetary Board's meeting next week. BSP Governor Eli Remolona says the central bank has maintained policy rates in its last two meetings because they have been reassessing evolving domestic developments. The BSP may extend its prudent pause at next week's meeting, but is still unsure whether there will be rate cuts in the coming months due to the slower second quarter growth of 4.3%. The Monetary Board has held the key interest rate at 6.25% after headline inflation slowed to a 16-month low of 4.7% in July. But this has yet to take into account the impact of recent typhoons and the looming effects of El Nino.
The data is still mixed, so we're not sure. We haven't been sure whether to raise or even to cut. But for now, we are at a pause and we're reassessing the situation. So that's where we stand.
Still, Remolona told reports that the unexpectedly slower GDP growth in the second quarter is a cause for concern. The BSP chief remained optimistic, though, that the country's growth would pick up again in the second half. Economic managers have said in a joint statement that government spending should accelerate in the coming quarters to recover growth momentum. Net inflows of foreign direct investments declined to $488 million in May as elevated inflation and record high borrowing costs dampened investors' sentiment. The latest figure is 34% lower than the $739 million logged in the same month of last year. Inflows in May also declined more than 44% from April. The central bank says the FDI remains subdued due to elevated inflation and interest rate levels globally. Higher commodity prices and borrowing rates raised the cost of investments in the country. An economist also said that investors are concerned over uncertainty surrounding the U.S. debt ceiling. Here to share with us his insights on the government's plans to boost economic growth following that sharp slowdown in the second quarter, we have with us on the show Dan Roces, Security Bank AVP and Chief Economist of Security Bank. Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for joining us on One News Now.
Good morning, Diego.
Yes, sir. Government plans to boost spending. Is this enough for us to reach a target growth of 6 to 7% given that slow second quarter GDP of 4.3%? What other measures, sir, do you think the government should take to reach this target?
Okay, so based on the figures that we saw yesterday, out of the second quarter 2023 GDP, the prime factor that pulled down growth was actually a lack of government spending. So that's easily reversible if the government just spends more. But it's easier said than done. There has to be some approvals of the projects where those funds will go, as well as some dampening already in terms of the schedule to proceed because of the perceived possible movement of the typhoons later this year. So spending will be up for sure, but that might not be enough to help reach the target of at least 6%. So rather for us, we're projecting, actually we were looking at 6.3%, but given that very dismal figure in the second quarter, we had to adjust further. Probably going to be at 5.6% growth for the full year of 2023.
Yeah, I'd like to clarify now, sir. Your GDP projection for the second quarter was, you mentioned 6%, is that right?
We were at 6.1.
6.1, yes.
Yeah.
How about for... yes, go ahead.
I mean, everybody missed the projections. So the 4.3 was a shocker, to say the least. So we knew government spending contracted, but we didn't really expect the extent to which it actually pulled down growth for the second quarter.
Yes, and the median projection for second quarter GDP was at 6%. Did you expect this 4.3% growth at all?
No, it was unprecedented. I mean, even if you know the models or the simulations that you do show that you expected some contraction in terms of government spending, some contraction in terms of investment, even if household consumption went down a bit. No? We never, well, at least the math of it never showed that it could go below 5%. No? So that was actually a really big surprise to us.
Okay. And sir, FDI net inflows, they declined in May. What's the impact of dampened investor sentiment on our growth in the second half?
All right, FDI, that's actually related to the lack of government spending as well. No? So those actually need some infrastructure support as well. So there could be some correlation to it. No, we have to check the numbers, but I would suppose that given all the pledges and some inflows, even if it did decline, it should have actually bumped up GDP a bit, no? But it did not. No, so I could suppose it's related to that lack of government spending as well. No? So once those FDIs actually materialize, like I said earlier, that's actually going to help with if they fast track the approval of those projects, government spending should roll out. No? Like I said, it takes time to get those projects approved. No? So
yes.
It could still be dampened up until the fourth quarter.
Okay. And there have been a lot of inflation stories. I think you've heard a lot of them in the past few days. We have that big-time oil price hike, higher prices of palay, manufacturers calling for price hikes. How big of a drag are these on a GDP in the second half?
Okay, let's talk about its effect on inflation first. No?
Okay.
So that's actually a significant risk, especially the oil price spikes. And to which we are also expecting further spikes because of that production cut out of Saudi Arabia. No? So that could potentially be a big risk, you know, in terms of the inflation direction. You mentioned typhoons. We have wage hikes as well, transport hikes, rice getting. If you take a look at the recent inflation numbers, rice is one of the biggest factors that actually pulled up inflation in July. No? So
yes.
Those are risks that I guess the BSP will have to assess. No? However, we have this very good base effect coming from inflation. So that will help with the inflation expectations as regards to, you know, even if we're not really feeling it, even if the month-on-month is going up, I mean, the optics of the headline will actually provide some comfort, you know, in terms of managing inflation expectations. That could potentially, well, we're expecting flat growth henceforth for GDP. And that also has something to do with how inflation really is felt, no?
Yes.
Aside from the headline numbers. So consumption still, you know, resilient, even though it declined in the second quarter. It's still around 70% of GDP. And you know how we spend, no, during the holidays. So that could provide some bump as well. But in terms of, you know, inflation as a growth dampener, no? We're expecting that to actually happen as well.
Okay. Well, lastly, sir, we have that monetary board meeting next week. Do you agree that the BSP should pause? And when are you expecting rate cuts?
Well, at this point, they have to pause, given how the collective rate hikes in the past have already affected growth. So, there is upside risk, no? Citing the inflation risks that I mentioned earlier, they could afford a pause at the moment. No? But I expect them to actually say that they will be very much willing to adjust, no? Should inflation get out of control, no? And reverse its trend, no? Which is something that we all have to be mindful of given the risks. No? So they'll be pausing. They will probably pause for a very long time. Notwithstanding that risk of a possible rate hike given inflation, they could probably stay pat up until the second quarter of next year at the current rate of 6.25. We are, among Southeast Asian countries, we are the ones who can afford to deviate from the Fed's path. No? So we'll only cut once the Fed does so. So that's the expectation. And we pencil that Fed cut will likely take place end of the second quarter next year. So we'll be likely following soon after.
Definitely, we'll be keeping an eye on these developments, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have for now. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Sir Dan Roses, Security Bank AVP and Chief Economist of Security Bank.
Thank you.
We'll be back with more stories after the break. Keep it here on the One News. You're still watching One News Now. I'm Diego Castro. The combined wealth of Filipino tycoons rose to $80 billion. That's according to the 2023 Forbes list of the 50 richest in the Philippines. The C siblings of SM are still on top of the pack with a combined net worth of $14.4 billion. They are followed by property tycoon Manny Villar with $9.7 billion and ports tycoon Enrique Razon Jr. with $8.1 billion. San Miguel President and CEO Ramon Ang moved up 5 spots to number 4, with his wealth now at $3.4 billion. Taking the 5th spot is Tony Tan Caktiong of Jollibee with a net worth of $3.2 billion. Meanwhile, the Aboitiz family is 6th on the list with $3.15 billion, followed by Lance Gokongwei and his siblings at $3 billion. Isidro Consunji and siblings, Jaime Sobel de Ayala and Lucio Tan, rounded up the top 10 list. Large language models such as ChatGPT and generative AI are what tech leader Ambe Tiero describes as the iPhone moment of artificial intelligence. In her conversation on Thought Leaders, the Accenture Philippines Country Managing Director says it's changing the BPO industry in a good way, but not without regulations. Let's watch this.
LLMs, or the large language models, which GPT is an example of, are pre-trained. And so, and it's been pre-trained with massive amounts of data, like millions of data on the internet. And so it comes ready, so to speak. So I think those are the two characteristics of Gen AI, and ChatGPT, of course, very interesting. When it launched in November, it only took 2 months to have 100 million users. And that's why I'm saying it's the iPhone moment of AI. Now, you said people are afraid, or
yes, they are, because this is
concerned.
Something that comes at scale. And you did make a mention there of ChatGPT that's run by OpenAI.
Yes.
We've also got Bard that actually
Google.
just launched by Google. So you can just imagine that they're really picking up steam when it comes to generative AI. But because it is pre-trained, there is that that opportunity to be more productive, but at the same time disruptive when it comes to jobs.
We believe, Accenture believes, that 40% of tasks will be transformed. I'm not saying it will disappear, but it will be transformed. So, meaning if you look at, I guess, your work week, 40% of that will change because there's this concept of co-pilot. You don't need to understand, and by language, you can detect the sentiment of the customer that you're talking to. So, co-pilot is the word that we want to use, and by that, we can transform the way work is performed and offer more customer service. I am in favor of regulations. There should be regulation for sure. For example, copyright issues, that's another. Some governments are already ahead, so hopefully we will follow soon. And I think there are efforts now between IBPAP, there's the ICT, the OST, so different, and the Analytics Association of the Philippines. I think they're all coming together and recommending responsible framework for innovation.
Catch the full interview of Accenture's Ambitiero on Thought Leaders with Kathy Yang on August 15, Tuesday at 9 p.m. only here on One News. And those are the top business stories of the hour. I'm Diego Castro. Join us again at 2 p.m. We are One News, all sides, all the time.